Men are dying by suicide at 4 times the rate of women. 4 times. And we're all missing the signs. Because here's what nobody tells you about depression in men. It doesn't look like sadness. It doesn't look like crying or staying in bed all day. That's exactly what makes it so deadly. Picture this. A man comes home from work. His partner asks, "How was your day?" "Fine," he says. But it wasn't fine. She can sense something's wrong. "What's bothering you?" "Nothing." He genuinely doesn't know how to articulate the heaviness in his chest. "Why won't you talk to me?" Now he feels attacked, like he's failing as a partner on top of everything else. So he gets defensive, raises his voice, or shuts down completely, leaves the room. From the outside, he looks like the problem difficult, closed off, maybe even aggressive. But from the inside, he's drowning. This happens thousands of times a day, and nobody calls it what it is: depression. Dr. Terence Real identified what he calls covert depression, depression that hides in plain sight. While women tend to internalize their pain through sadness and withdrawal, men externalize through irritability, anger, and what he calls violent self-reliance. The problem? Our entire diagnostic system was built around the female presentation, so millions of men are suffering from a condition we're not even screening for properly. 75% of suicide deaths are men, not because they're inherently more suicidal, but because they've been suffering in silence longer by the time anyone notices. Here's what's actually happening. From the time a boy is old enough to feel, he's being programmed. Big boys don't cry. Man up. Don't be a sissy. Psychologist Ronald Levant calls this normative male alexithymia, a culturally induced inability to identify and express emotions. It's not that men don't have feelings. It's that they were systematically taught to disconnect from them so early that they literally don't have the language to describe what's happening inside. He's functionally illiterate in his own emotional language, what Daniel Goleman would call a complete absence of self-awareness, because you can't develop emotional intelligence when you've been trained from birth to ignore your internal experience. You can't manage emotions you've been taught don't exist. A man who's depressed doesn't say he's sad. He says he's tired, always tired, exhausted to his bones, even after sleeping 8 hours, an exhaustion that no amount of sleep fixes. Because depression drains cognitive and physical resources at a terrifying rate, especially when you're using all your energy to maintain a facade of being okay. He doesn't talk about feeling hopeless. He works 70-hour weeks, not because he loves his job, but because work is the only place where his value is clear and measurable. At home, he feels like he's failing as a husband, as a father, as a man. But at work, he can point to something and say, "I did that." The rest of us call it being a good provider and reward him for slowly killing himself. He sits in his car in the driveway for 20 minutes before going inside, not because he doesn't love his family, but because he needs those 20 minutes to prepare for the performance, to put on the mask, to become what everyone needs him to be. And when he's not performing, he's numbing, scrolling for hours, drinking more than he used to, driving too fast, taking risks that seem irrational to everyone around him. Bessel van der Kolk explains how trauma and chronic emotional suppression fundamentally change our relationship with sensation. We either feel everything too intensely or nothing at all, and we'll do anything to regulate that unbearable state. Then the body starts keeping score: back pain, headaches, stomach issues. Gabor Mate's research shows how psychological distress manifests as physical symptoms when we refuse to acknowledge it consciously. Men go from doctor to doctor, getting test after test, searching for a physical explanation for what is fundamentally an emotional wound. Because physical pain is acceptable. Emotional pain makes you weak. Here's what makes this truly insidious. Society rewards all of this. We praise men who push through, who handle their business, who never complain, never break down, never show weakness. We call them strong. We call them reliable. Meanwhile, studies show that men who conform most strongly to traditional masculine norms have worse mental health outcomes, higher rates of substance abuse, higher rates of heart disease, and die younger. Carl Jung warned that what we resist persists, and what we suppress will eventually erupt in destructive ways. This is why male depression so often presents as anger, addiction, or reckless behavior. These aren't character flaws. They're symptoms of a much deeper wound that has no other outlet. The tragedy deepens when these men try to reach out. I've heard from countless men who opened up to their partners about struggling, only to watch those partners lose attraction to them, not out of malice, but because we're all conditioned to expect men to be rocks. When the rock cracks, we don't know how to handle it. I've heard from men who told their friends they were struggling, only to be met with jokes or silence or complete ghosting. Dr. Robert Glover describes how men learn that their authentic selves are fundamentally unacceptable, so they create a false self designed to win approval. But maintaining that false self requires constant energy, constant vigilance, constant pretense, and eventually there's nothing left. Brené Brown's research confirms this. We cannot selectively numb emotions. When we close ourselves off from pain, we also close ourselves off from joy, from connection, from love. We become what she calls the walking dead, physically present but emotionally absent, going through the motions while dying inside. This is why the suicide rate is so devastating. By the time the mask cracks enough for anyone to notice, they've already been suffering in silence for years. They've already tried to handle it alone, the way they were taught. And by the time they reach out, they're not at the beginning of depression, they're at the edge. I know a man who spent 3 years in this exact trap. Anger, exhaustion, numbness that made everything feel unreal. One desperate night, he texted his brother 3 words, "I need help." 6 months of therapy later, he told me, "I thought being vulnerable would make me less of a man. Instead, it made me more of a person. I didn't lose my strength. I finally found it." He's still here because he broke the silence. Peter Levine's work on trauma explains that healing requires completing the stress response cycle our bodies couldn't complete when we were forced to suck it up. But most men never get that chance. They're too busy performing strength to actually become strong. The armor they built to protect themselves becomes the thing that's killing them. John Gottman's research shows that men are more physiologically reactive to emotional conflict than women. Their heart rates spike higher and stay elevated longer. This means emotional conversations are literally more physically uncomfortable for them. Combined with zero training in how to navigate emotions and active punishment for trying, you get millions of men who would rather die than have the conversation that might save their lives. If you're a man reading this and something in you is screaming, "That's me," listen. What you're experiencing is real. It's not weakness. It's not failure. That exhaustion that no amount of sleep fixes. That numbness where nothing feels real anymore. That anger that erupts over nothing because you've been holding everything else in for years. That's depression. And it's treatable. Not with willpower. Not with working harder. Not with pushing through. With actual help. You don't have to call a therapist tomorrow if you're not ready. Start with 3 words to one person you trust. "I'm not okay." Or call 988, the suicide and crisis lifeline. It's not just for emergencies. It's for when you need someone who won't judge you for being human. Therapy isn't about making you less of a man. It's about teaching you the emotional literacy you should have learned as a child, but didn't. It's about learning that emotions aren't the enemy, avoiding them is. That vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the only path to genuine connection. That the armor protecting you is actually suffocating you. The most counterintuitive truth. Real strength isn't maintaining that armor at all costs. Real strength is having the courage to take it off, piece by piece, in front of people who've earned the right to see you without it. You don't get a medal for suffering in silence. You get more suffering, and everyone who loves you gets to watch you disappear. If you love a man who's struggling, and I know you've probably been trying to reach him for months, feeling helpless yourself, understand, he won't come to you saying, "I'm depressed." What you've been interpreting as him shutting you out is actually him drowning while trying to look like he's swimming. He'll work constantly. He'll be irritable. He'll pull away. Your job isn't to fix him. It's to create a space safe enough that he can stop performing. That means not reacting with shock when he admits he's struggling, not making his vulnerability about you, understanding that healing isn't linear, and recognizing that when he finally says, "I'm not okay," he's not giving up, he's choosing to fight. Remember that man who came home and said nothing was wrong? Here's what he needed to say. "I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for a while, and I need help figuring out why." Just those words, that conversation, that's where healing begins. The strongest thing a man can do isn't suffering in silence. It's saying, "I'm not okay," and meaning it. It's choosing vulnerability over pretense. It's asking for help when everything in him says he shouldn't need it. That's real strength. That's choosing life. Everything else is just slow death, wearing a mask of stability. The world needs men who are emotionally alive, who can feel fully and express honestly, who can be strong without being stone. But we only get there when we tell the truth about male depression, when we stop expecting men to be unbreakable, when we create space for the full range of human experience, instead of this narrow definition of masculinity that's killing them. Your pain is real. Your struggle is valid. You deserve support just as much as anyone else, not despite being a man, but because you're a human being who's hurting. Tomorrow, you can wake up and choose differently. Not fixed, not better, just honest. And that honesty, that crack in the armor, that's where the light gets in. That's where life begins again. And that's always been enough.